We've been driving Helga, our camper van, around the UK for the past 6 months. We're currently in Scotland and it's time for us to explore Glen Coe. We've just left the Isle of Skye on a ferry and the route to Glen Coe takes us right past where we lived in Scotland. So we made sure to do a detour there and had a little stroll on the grounds, and just behind me is the manor house where we were based for a very wet winter season in Scotland. This is what the manor house looked like. We were gardeners and housekeepers there and the weather was awful and most of our hikes looked like this. The famous viaduct from Harry Potter was just up the road from where we lived, so we headed back for old time's sakes, but it's become a lot more popular since we were there in 2013. We did a little detour to Glen Nevis, which is the valley beneath the highest mountain in the UK. We were thinking of hiking up Ben Nevis after our failed attempt last time we were here in the deep snow, but instead we opted for a much quieter hike known as Stob Ban. The weather wasn't exactly on our side, but we did spot this huge herd of deer. There are a couple of really big stags in the group and the females were just running like crazy. It was like watching a migration route in Africa. We were cold and wet when we got back to Helga, so we had a hot shower and got into our cosy clothes. And then Craig made us hot chocolates and we roasted some marshmallows on the gas, which is forbidden but so delicious. Woohoo! The next morning we did a nice gentle valley walk to Still Falls. It led us to the second highest waterfall in Scotland at 120 metres, but the most impressive part of this hike for us was this crazy rope bridge. It actually gave me quite a bit of vertigo and was really wobbly, but it was really fun to try.
Hello Laura, give her a wave. Oh, come on.
After checking out these Highland cattle and doing a big food shop in Fort William, it was time for us to finally head to Glen Coe. This is the sort of place that looks good even in bad weather. Our first mountain hike in Glen Coe is a tricky one for me to pronounce. This is Buachella Etifig. It involves 2 Munros and we had really interesting clouds sweeping through, so it was super pretty. We met a lovely man at the top of the mountain who was 80 years old and had set himself the mission to hike every Munro, which is 282 mountains over 3,000 feet. He was doing it in aid of Alzheimer's charity after his wife was diagnosed with the condition. At the summit now, we're about 1,000 metres up, just under. Some pretty clouds. And a cheese and pickle sandwich. We're really in the rutting season now, and on our way back down we heard this stag boogling. It's autumn, so it's quite easy to wake up early for sunrise, and the scenery was absolutely spectacular with the sun hitting the mountains. There's a couple of rather famous stags who live in the area, and they're clearly fed by people, which is a big shame. We didn't feed them obviously, but we were able to still capture videos and photos of them in the nice light. When the weather wasn't ideal, we would rest our legs in the camper van and cook lots of delicious food.
Action-packed video, this one. Oh, lush. Woo!
And in the evenings we'd get comfortable on the sofa and watch our TV, which is a tablet balanced on some food tins. After a bit of a rainy spell, we were back in action with clear blue skies, so it was time to hike the UK's most legendary ridgeline. We're heading up Unuk Iguk. It's not only the narrowest ridgeline in the UK, but it's also a really tough scramble and is in some of the climbing books as a moderate rock climb. It's due to take 8 to 9 hours for us to traverse, and to be honest, we don't know how we're going to cope with all of the exposure.
making it look real easy, though.
It's not. To make things even more challenging, we had a layer of ice and snow on the floor. Probably shouldn't have done this little prank on Craig because it scared the shit out of him.
Jesus.
Some of the narrow ridgelines we've done in Scotland have had alternative routes you can take if you're finding it too scary. We haven't had to take them, but on this route there are no other options. One of the scariest sections was where we had to climb about 2 or 3 meters vertically down. And we were pretty confident we could make it, but we just didn't know if we'd be able to come back up if we had any problems further along. It was definitely the most challenging route we've ever scrambled along, and there were sections which were just completely vertical and we couldn't find a safe foot or handhold to climb up. So sometimes when we couldn't go up, we had to find a route around, and we were advised not to take these routes in our guidebook because they're basically completely eroded goat tracks which are extremely exposed. But we had no other choice, so we were basically crawling on all fours above really exposed sections, and it was absolutely terrifying. There were also quite a few of these chimney sections where we were basically climbing up this narrow gap between the rocks, and to our left was just a sheer drop. Just to give you an idea of how challenging this route was, the ridge was actually 3 kilometers long, and it took us 5 hours to traverse. We took a shortcut route back down to the main road, which was basically a very steep scoria slope which my jelly legs did not like, but then it meant we just had 4 kilometers along the road back to Helga, our camper van. Once the scoria section was over, we bumped into this really friendly goat. I mean, he's probably been fed, which is a big shame, so he was basically begging for us to give him food, which we didn't, but he was so beautiful with icy blue eyes. And after 9 long hours, we made it back to Helga. After a couple of days relaxing, we were back hiking on the Munros in Glen Coe. With every day that passed, we were seeing more herds of deer, and the hills were just alive with what sounded like cow moos, but were actually the stags boogling. The stags were actually corralling the females a bit like a border collie would with sheep. And when the weather wasn't on our side, we'd take scenic drives and just do some valley walks, and even that was beautiful. But when the weather perked up, we made our way up Bennyvihe. We still had a 50% chance of rain, so we weren't very hopeful for the day, but it ended up being absolutely perfect up there. And we got these incredible views of the peaks, and one of the mountains looked like this crater of a volcano. There wasn't really much scrambling, and this was the only exposed section, so it was a pretty nice hike for us. But we took a different route back so we could do a loop, and it ended up being a complete bog where we just had to take our shoes off and walk barefoot. Overnight we got our first dump of snow of the season, so we decided to make our way up Bidian Nambian. This is the highest mountain in the Argyll region, and because this route is north facing, it means the snow doesn't melt for much of the year. Saying that, we were expecting this light dusting of snow to melt throughout the day, but it didn't, and it was a winter wonderland at the top. The route is already known as being pretty rough terrain, and it was even harder trying to find our way in the snow as we couldn't see where the trail was and there were rocks hidden underneath. The weather turned a bit nasty and it even snowed on our way back down. For our final hike in Glen Coe, we made our way up this one, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. But it's Gaelic for Rocky Hill, and it is basically just a very boring hill, but it offers incredible views of all the jagged peaks. There wasn't a trail leading up, we were basically walking through boggy moorland, but the views from the top were incredible, and it only took about 3.5 hours. Before we left Glen Coe, we made sure to head back to this area where we could see these stags, and today they were fighting together. Although it felt very much like a play fight, like they were testing in case a big boy came along. And after a couple of weeks in Glen Coe, it's time for us to leave, and our final stop in Scotland is the Isle of Arran. To get there involved one of the most mental ferries we've ever been on.
Oh my god! What the hell? Quick, do it before a wave comes!
After that crazy ferry ride, we headed straight for the hills on a little hike. And the wind was pretty wild up there. On the plus side, we got to see some deer on the way back down, and this island is famous for them. The weather was not on our side when we were in the Isle of Arran, so we had a few soggy days inside the camper van just cooking nice meals and relaxing before we could get out hiking again.
Craig has cooked a super roast.
Minus the chicken.
This island is home to Scotland's Big Five, so you can find seals, otters, red deer, red squirrels and golden eagles here. And we were certainly seeing a lot of seals on our coastal walks. We saw this beautiful waterfall on our hike, but nothing prepared us for the next one we were about to visit. The Isle of Arran is considered to be a miniature version of Scotland, so it has a bit of everything. And we obviously wanted to explore its jagged peaks in the centre of the island. So we set off on a long hike up Castell Achel, where we spent the next few hours in fog and rain. It was such a shame, and we got a few teasers when the cloud lifted of what the view would look like, but most of the time we were in fog. We did attempt this hike on another occasion from a different route, and we got pretty much the same views. So after about a week of rain and bad weather where sections of the island actually flooded, the weather finally turned and we had blue skies. And while we didn't get good weather on our hikes, at least we had good weather now because there was about to be a solar storm during the night and we got to witness the Northern Lights in Scotland. Now we've lived in Arctic Norway, so we've seen some crazy Northern Light shows, so these ones don't really compare for us, but it was still pretty special to see them in the UK. Our last day was spent searching for red deer that call the island home, and there's a population of around 2,000 here, which is pretty phenomenal for such a small island. And that's one of the main reasons we picked this island to come to, so we could try and see the rut during autumn. But they were all pretty chilled on our visit and we didn't witness any fights. Luckily, we had a pretty nice farewell from a resident seal when we pulled up here by the sea to enjoy our last cup of tea before catching the ferry.
Hey, I got it!
Hey!
Hey!
Hey!